after the 1991 census, and as you know, we're in the period of doing the census now, and in 2011, the numbers will come out, and we're going to have new lines drawn by the legislature. Ohio, by the way, stands to lose 2 congressional seats right now, but all the state house lines will be redrawn based upon population patterns and growth and losses. Well, after the 80s, in 1991, Franklin County gained a couple seats at the expense of Cuyahoga County. And one of those happened to be where I've lived my whole life, in the Northland area of Columbus, North London and Northland and far north Columbus, in a seat that included some of the win-win areas of Worthington, Westerville, and Dublin, north of 270. And so I decided to run, and I did in 1992, and knocked on doors for 98 straight days, and was elected to the legislature, which was a fascinating experience. The thing that was amazing is I went into the minority. DeVern Reif, Speaker for Life, they called him, was the Speaker of the Ohio House. In 1994, Republicans took the majority in the Ohio House, so I got to be in the majority after being 2 years in the minority. And then term limits had passed in 1992, so I knew I was going to be not in the House longer than 2000 for sure. So I decided to start a real estate business. There were really no other office I wanted to run for. The state Senate had a senator who was going to be there after 2000, and he's somebody I supported. Obviously, my congressman I supported. And so I thought, you know what, I've done what I like to do. I don't want to do any other type of office. I'm going to do something else. So I started a real estate business at the time and was engaged fully in the legislature and real estate, and life was good. In 1999, getting ready to ramp up the business more, when a shocker occurred. John Kasich announced his retirement. First time in my lifetime in the 12th Congressional District that there was an open seat, that there wasn't an incumbent running. Sam Devine had been there for a long time, but was beaten by Bob Szymanski. Bob Szymanski was beaten by John Kasich. Now John Kasich was retiring in 2000. So decided to take that jump, had a primary, had a general election, and won. The district got redrawn a little bit in 2001. It was the fastest growing district, congressional district in the state. So I had to lose areas. I lost Whitehall and a small piece of southeastern Columbus, and I lost part of that win-win area of the Dublin schools, Old Sawmill. And the rest of the district, just so everybody knows, is most of Dublin, Franklin County and Delaware County, Dublin, all of Delaware County. Then if you go across the top of Franklin County, I have Worthington Hills, I have east of Worthington Hills, far north Columbus, Westerville, New Albany, Gehenna, Blacklick, Reynoldsburg, and then inside the Beltway, almost everything east of 71 to downtown, east of downtown, east of Parsons Avenue to 104. And so about 40% of my district is the city of Columbus. And then I go over into Licking County, which includes about half of Licking County, most of the population, but half of Newark west of Licking County. One of the most diverse districts in the state. I've got urban, I've got suburban, and I've got rural. And the fastest growing congressional district in the state. In fact, most of the districts aren't growing, they're losing population. My congressional district is still growing. Obviously parts of Franklin County, southern Delaware County, where I live around Westerville, as well as western Licking County. And so I get elected 2001, I get sworn in. We have George Bush, who's president. Now remember at the time, I think this is important, and I don't say this often enough, and you might remember this. Back when he was sworn in, that January, there were still a number of my colleagues who were just sworn in, others who've been there a while, who actually refused to recognize George Bush as president. Publicly refused to recognize George Bush as president. And that's kind of how his term began. It was kind of rocky. We kind of forget about that. And that spring was pretty rocky. And September 11th changed all that. It was a surreal experience being there on September 11th of 2001. And for a short time after that, everybody got along pretty well. And quite frankly, we didn't know what we were in for. We had no idea what was happening, didn't know what was going to happen. And I'll remind you of this too, which I think is important to say, not an excuse, but just good to remember what the facts are. Today versus then. Barack Obama, when he was sworn in 2009, prehistoric, media covered that. What the media never did cover, though, is the fact that his majorities in the House and Senate are historically large. He has nearly an 80-member majority in the House, and after Arlen Specter switched to become a Democrat in 2009, and Al Franken got sworn in Minnesota, for Minnesota, he had a 60-40 majority in the Senate, veto-proof margin. Last president to have, of either party, to have those types of majorities was Jimmy Carter, 1977. Didn't work out so well for him. Just kind of an interesting sidebar. So Bush, back in 2001, you might remember, it was a 50-50 tie. Jim Jeffords from Vermont flipped, became an independent, and caucused with the Democrats. And so they had a barely a majority, but the Democrats still had a majority. He didn't have any sort of 60-vote majority, never did have a 60-vote majority. His entire 8 years he had to work with Senate Democrats. And we could argue and debate whether or not the strategy he took in dealing with them was right or not. But the fact is, it is what it is, and it was that. It was a filibuster minority. And so, after September 11th, the president made a call that many of us thought he shouldn't have made at the time, but he was the commander-in-chief, and because of the time that it was, he made it. We passed a bill in the House regarding this creating a new Homeland Security Department and a new Transportation Security Agency, because we realized at that point in time from our intelligence service that we had huge holes in our transportation security, let alone our port security, and still to this day in our land security on our southern border. And so we said we need to make sure that we do this quickly, effectively, and give as much control to the administration over hiring these employees as possible. Well, in the Senate they had a different idea. And so they wanted to make sure that these employees had union rights. And this got bogged down in the Senate. And the Senate Democrats began to filibuster this issue. And the president, quite frankly, not wanting to have a protracted fight before starting this Homeland Security Department, basically acquiesced. And we had a huge new spending on it because of it. That is a legacy of that to the program today. And that was just the beginning of what I would say the president choosing not to fight on domestic spending issues, because quite frankly, after September 11th, his focus was clearly Afghanistan and Iraq and the war on terror in general. And he would probably, if he were here today, argue that that was the right focus. Some of us hoped that he would take a stand on some of the domestic spending. I was in a meeting with him where a group of us urged him, argued with him, pleaded with him to engage on the farm bill and to veto the farm bill. And he just didn't want to go down that road because he needed these votes on the war. He needed these votes on the terrorism budget. He needed these votes on Homeland Security budget. He just didn't want to pick fights where he didn't think he could win. And so, again, we can